All right. So the session that we're going to be doing today is basically I'm going to be setting up the project for you. Now, the project itself is going to be done in steps. So today, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through setting up the network and the DHCP so that we have a fully functional connectivity set up network. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. Because of the fact that we are now not in school, and very simply, it would be very hard for me to actually see exactly what you have done in terms of a project. I'm going to actually set up the project during these sessions, and I will also post a video at the end of the week, Thursday, either end of Thursday, beginning of Friday, and this video is going to have everything that we've done in the session. This video is then going to be used for you guys to take a quiz. The quiz is going to be set up basically on Friday, and you are going to have 3 days in which to attempt the quiz. So in other words, you can attempt it either on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, Sunday up to 11:59 p.m. Okay, and the amount of questions are going to be based on what we've actually covered in the session. So in this particular session, because we're going to be covering two things, the quiz is going to be worth 10 marks this week, okay? And each mark, so in other words, each question, there's going to be 10 questions, is worth 1 mark. And that basically translates into your project mark at the end. So for instance, the entire 3 weeks of quizzes that we're going to have is going to total out to 25 marks. And this is going to be your project mark, okay? So please make sure that you pay attention. It's, I think, a good idea for you to go over this at least twice. So once in the lab and once actually watching the video when it's posted. The questions are going to be specific. They're going to be specific to the actual project and a little bit from the chapters, okay? Basically on how this project would have to be done. So for instance, if I give you a command like ncpa.cpl, which brings up network connections, that can be on the quiz. In other words, I can ask you, what command do you use to bring up network connections? Or I can ask you it in a different way, but basically that means that you're going to have to remember that particular command, okay? There's going to be certain things in the actual project where you're going to have to try and remember where you've actually gone inside the project. Each section is broken up, and basically you should be able to come along with me for this particular project because everything that I'm doing in here we have covered in lecture, okay? So the project is not too difficult, okay, if you look at it from a certain perspective. All right, so with that, I am going to start with the VMware. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is the actual project. So the project itself, we already know that we have basically a network, 2 networks to create, okay? And we need 2 servers and 2 hosts. This should, at this point in time in your education, should automatically, without it being in the actual project instructions, it should automatically come to you that the servers are going to have Server 2016 on them, okay? And since we've been using data center in the actual classes, that would be what we would use for the servers. And also, of course, we're not going to be using core because we don't want to just use a CLI in PowerShell. We want to use the full GUI. So we would use the desktop experience. Okay? The hosts, on the other hand, since we're using Windows 10, okay, in most of the labs that we do, so basically in the lab environment is what I'm saying, it should come to you that we need to use Windows 10 for the hosts. Now, technically, you can use any Windows, and I would not mark you incorrect on it if you decided to use Windows 7, for instance, but it's not the best operating system to use because it is no longer viable in enterprise environment. Okay, Microsoft has decided that Windows 10 is no longer going to be supported. So that would be a bad choice. Windows 8, you could use it, but again, kind of a bad choice because of the way that Windows 8 is set up and the fact that it has a bit of a stigma associated with it. Windows 10, on the other hand, seems to be getting accepted now, and a lot of people are using it, and it seems to be used quite a bit. So Windows 10 would be the actual Windows that I would use. Not only that, but you would also use an enterprise edition of Windows because you want to be able to have full capability in Windows. And Windows 10 Enterprise will allow you to use things like Hyper-V and domains and so forth. So it would be one of the best options if you were in a company that had the ability of volume licensing. So in order to be able to set up this particular project, we have to make sure that the very first thing, no matter what we are doing, whether we are actually working on, let's say, a program or setting up a network or setting up a computer, it's basically the exact same things. You have to plan before you start working on anything. You have to understand what you are needed to do, and then you have to plan it out to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Okay? Always, always plan. And it's best to actually plan on paper. So in other words, you should put notes on paper, thinking about what you need to do. Now, for instance, with this project itself, there's a few things that we have to do. We have to make sure that we set up our network as it is advised in the topology. So basically, this topology is showing us how our network needs to be set up. We don't want to use core, so we're going to be using the GUIs. Next, we know that server 1 is going to be a router between the two networks. So we know that this server here is going to need at least 2 NIC cards, one for each subnet, because any router that you have set up must have a separate interface for every single subnet that it is supposed to support. Okay? So in this particular case, we need at least 2 NIC cards, so 2 interfaces. We also need server 2 to basically become Active Directory domain services, DHCP, DNS, and WINS. Okay? Our domain name is going to be leo.com, and then both hosts are going to receive all their information from DHCP. Okay? So up to this point, we're just basically reading through what we have to do. We need to create a reverse lookup zone for the DNS, and we have to set up our VPN. We also have to make sure that we understand what we're doing so we can answer questions or show the work that we've done. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to plan. We've already figured out that we need server OS and Windows 10 OS to set up our machines. So these machines now being set up, okay, will be done on VMware. Now, to save time, I've already installed all the OSs on VMware. This should be fairly straightforward. You have an entire lab that I put on Blackboard that tells you step by step how to set up machines. So this should not be too difficult for you. Basically, setting up the VM and then installing the OS should be fairly straightforward. The next thing that we have to figure out is how to set up the network, okay? Now, in VMware, the LAN segments are what are considered virtual switches, okay? So basically what this is the virtual switch, okay, allows you to plug in devices and they will be specifically on that network. So when we go into our VMware, let me switch over to VMware here, okay? And let's go into our router, since the router is the very first thing that we're going to take a look at, because it is a very important piece of hardware, and we know that we need at least 2 NIC cards in here, and we do not want to forget this. So in the router, what we need to do is in VMware, we have to go into settings and set up these LAN segments. So the very first thing that we do is we right click on Leo router, okay, and then we go into settings. This will spring up this particular interface for us, and you can see here that if I click on network adapter, okay, it actually has the network adapter set up here as host only. But we want LAN segments. Now, normally, right now, I do have LAN segments set up here, okay? These are all the LAN segments that I have, but it's easy enough to either remove them or add them if I need to. All I have to do is click on the add button or the remove button or the rename button if that's the case and I have something else, and then I can create a LAN segment, okay? Once I create the LAN segment and say OK, it will appear in this drop-down menu here, okay? Now, this drop-down has these 2 LAN segments, and in this particular case, these are the 2 that I'm going to use for my actual project. Now, remember, these LAN segments here are set up as different LAN segments, but this address here, the IP address of the network, doesn't mean anything. All this is a name. That's all it is. It's for identification purposes only, okay? The LAN segment is now set up, and it is like something that I can plug into in order to be able to use. So in this case, this is the router. So one of the LAN segments that I'm creating is going to be on the 100 section. So I'll say here, the 100. Now, you can see that I only have 1 network adapter. So I'm going to have to add a second network adapter to this particular machine. So if I come down here and click on the add button, okay, the hardware wizard will show up and I can choose the network adapter here. Once I click finish, I have a second network adapter. In this second network adapter, I do the exact same thing. I go to LAN segment and I choose the 200. So now I have a LAN segment here with 100 and I have a LAN segment here with 200. So this is now complete and I say OK. Now, this will run through because the machine is on, so it's actually installing this card for me right this minute, and it completes, and now I have 2 NIC cards in this VM. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the settings for DC1. In DC1, I go into settings and I set up my 1 network adapter in here with a LAN segment. Now, we know that this DC1, okay, is going to be server 2 because that is actually what contains the Active Directory, DHCP, DNS, and so forth. So we know that that's going to be on our 200, okay, network. So therefore, we take a look and we go into the 200 LAN segment and say OK. Here on client 1, this one is going to be in our settings as LAN segment on the 100. So again, set that up quickly as LAN segment on the 100. Okay, say OK. And then go to client 2, and we can click on settings. And we go in and we set up this LAN segment as 200. So we go to the 200 LAN segment. All right. So now we have all our LAN segments set up correctly. Okay. So now what we want to do is to start setting up connectivity of the actual network. We want to make sure that the entire network is connected and working correctly. So the very first place that we're going to go is we're going to go into each of these computers, okay? And we're going to do a few of the changes that we have to make sure that we have the connectivity. Now, before we start working on the IP addresses, the very first thing that we should do is set up the names for all these computers, okay? We need to make sure that we call these computers correctly so that they are not cryptic. Because when Windows is installed, it creates a random name, okay, depending on how it's set up for your computer. We do not want this, okay? So the first thing we should do is set up the names. So now, there is a couple of different ways of getting into the names. One of the ways that we can do this is we can go in and we can go into System, okay? And in System here, it will tell us what the computer name is. And we can click on Change Settings and change, and then we can type in a new name. So in this particular case, we're going to type in Leo DC1, okay? And we'll say OK. Okay? This is going to tell us that we need to restart the machine. We close it, and we can restart it. And then we'll go to the next machine. Another way of changing the name, okay, we can go into the local server here, and we can click on computer name. This is only for servers though, okay? And we click on this computer name, and we can go in here and we can change it. In this change, we can go into domain name, or sorry, not domain name, my apologies, computer name, and we can change the computer name, Leo Router, and say OK. Again, it's going to ask us to restart. All right, just wait for that. And say OK, and say restart. Now, we can go into the clients now. Another way of changing the name is by using sysdm.cpl, okay? This will jump us directly into our system properties. And we can change the name here, okay? And in this particular case, we'll call this Leo, and then client, and then the number, which is 2. And we'll say OK. Once again, it will ask us to say OK, we close, and we restart. And then the final one, another way of changing the name, okay, is through the ability to do it through PowerShell. Okay, so if we run PowerShell, and if you are running CMD, okay, the command line, or PowerShell, make sure that you run it as an administrator, okay? Because otherwise you will have problems, all right? So make sure that you run it as an administrator. And now, if I wanted to find out what this particular computer is called, I can type in what is known as hostname, okay? This is a variable, a system variable, and it tells me exactly what this particular computer is named. If I want to change this name, I can create a command called rename, rename computer, okay? And I want to create a new name, okay? and then the new name that I would actually want to change this computer to. So in this particular case, it's going to be Leo Client 1, and then I can tell it to restart and hit enter. This will now restart the computer and rename it to Leo 1 for me. Okay, so there are many different ways that you can actually rename the computers. All right, so now that we've done this, now we can go in and go into each of our systems and actually put in IP addresses. Now, when we take a look at our topology, we know that network 1 here, one of the NICs will, on server 1 will be on network 1, the other will be on network 2. The host 1 will be on network 1, host 2 will be on network 2, and so forth. But we are not given any IP addresses. All we have is the IP address of the network plus the prefix. So we know that this is our entire IP address here, and our final or last octet is our hosts. So the hosts -2, because we need to make sure that we don't use the broadcast and we don't use the network address. So therefore, we have hosts in between. Normally, a router uses the very first IP address out of the list. This does not mean that you have to use the very first IP address out of the list. Okay? It is just a convention that a lot of people are used to. If you go into, for instance, an interview, please do not say that you have to use the very first IP address, because they will think that you do not know what you're talking about. Okay? IP addresses can be used anywhere, okay, in that range. If I want to create the default gateway with an address of 192.168.100.122, I can do this. It is not a problem, okay? But in this particular case, I'm going to use the very first IP address for the router. So therefore, I'm going to go in and we're going to go take a look at our router. Okay, I'm going to jump into our router. And one of the ways that I can get into my network connections is by using the command ncpa, okay, .cpl. So this command will open up my network connections. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to rename this particular network card, and I'm going to rename it Network 1. All right, so Network 1 is going to be my very first card. Here I'm going to set up my IP address, so I right click and go into properties, and then I go into my IP version 4. I click on properties and I use a static IP address. So the static IP address in this particular case, since this is going to be on my network 1, which is the 100, it will be 192.168.100.1. When I hit tab, the subnet mask will automatically populate. Okay? Currently, we do not have a default gateway, nor will this need a default gateway because it is a router. So this and the DNS can stay blank. And we just say, OK. Close. Please remember to close your windows after you've made these changes and after saying OK. Because if you do not, these changes will not propagate. Okay? And you will be scratching your head wondering why this is not working. With Ethernet number 1, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change it to Network 02. All right, and then I'm going to change the IP version 4 address to a static address as well, and this one will be 192.168.200 oops, .1. And again, we have our subnet mask, and we say OK. And now we have both of our networks set up. If I wanted to take a look and see what IP address that I have set up on this network, I can double click on the network and click on Details. In Details, it actually tells me a lot of information, including my MAC address. Okay, and I'll close that, and I'll close this, and I'll take a look at the details here as well, and you can see that both IP addresses are correct, and I have set them up. So now that we have this set up, we're going to go to DC1, and we're going to log in there, and we're going to change the IP addresses here. So another way that you can get into the network connections is by actually coming down here to your taskbar and clicking on your network icon here, where you basically have the network access set up. So if I go down here and I actually click on this, you will see that it pops up with a little menu, and here it says Network Settings. Network Settings, if I click on, lead me to this Ethernet, okay, window. Here, Change Adapter Options is another way that I can get into my adapter options. This is DC1, so I'm going to rename this to Network 2 because that is the network that it is on, okay? And I'm going to change the IP address. Now, in this particular case, the IP address that I'm going to use is the next IP address up from the actual gateway. So it's going to be 192.168.200.2. Okay? Once again, we don't have a default gateway and we don't have any DNS servers currently, so we'll leave those blank and say OK. Then we will close. Now we are going to finish off by going into client 1 and client 2 and do the exact same thing. Another way of actually getting into the network is if you go onto the Start button and you right-click, you can actually go into Network Connections, okay? And then you can click on Ethernet and change adapter settings. Again, we're going to rename this. This is going to be Network 2. And in this particular case, the IP address that we're going to use is going to be 10 up from the bottom. So in other words, we're going to use 192.168. And this, remember, is client number 2, so we're using the 200. And then we're going to do 10, okay? And then we'll say OK and close. And then the final one, the final client, we'll take a look at. I'll open the client up. Go into our network connections, Ethernet, change adapter, rename. This one will be Network 1. Which means the IP address is going to be 192.168.100.10. All right, so now everything is set up, both with LAN segments and with the actual IP addresses. So client 2, we know, is on this side of the network, and it has the most areas that it can ping. It can ping the router, it can ping the actual DC1, and it can ping itself. So what are we going to do? Well, the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into client 2, and we're going to run a CMD, the command line. So the command line, and we're going to make sure that we run it so that we have the proper privileges. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ping ourselves. Now there's two ways we can do this. We can do this by pinging the local host, okay, which will give us this particular ping, but this ping is in IP version 6. Or we can ping our actual IP address, which is 192.168. And remember, this is client 2, so it's 200 and then .10. Okay, and as you can see that this is actually showing us that we do have a network card that is functional. In other words, our TCP IP stack that is inside the computer is functioning correctly. So that means that our network card is functioning correctly. Okay, this is the reason why we ping ourselves, is to find out and make sure that the NIC is working correctly. We know that it's working correctly, so now what we can do is we can try to ping our actual router. Now remember, this router is not actually a router yet. It's just a server with a NIC card in it. Okay, so we're going to ping it. We're going to say ping 192.168.200.1. Now, how many of you think that this is going to ping correctly? Anybody else? Okay. The answer is no, it will not ping. Okay? It's going to give us a problem. Why? Because exactly as someone said in the comments, we have not done anything with the firewall. Okay? The firewall is still an impedance to us. So we have to go in and we have to make sure that we set up our firewalls. Okay, so one of the things that we can do, okay, with sorry, wrong place, is to type in the control panel. One way to get into the firewall is through the control panel. Okay, and if we go into the control panel and we change this to small icons, we can find firewall right here. In the firewall, the advanced settings is where we need to go. So in the advanced settings, if we go into here, we can have inbound rules. The inbound rules for this in particular is the file imprint ICMP. Okay, so this is actually what we're looking for right here. Now, on the client, we can see that we have two ICMP version 4s. One is for domain and the other one is for private. We need to turn both of these on. Okay, so we need to enable both of these to be allowed to ping. Later on, when we create the Active Directory, we're going to be on a domain and we're going to want to ping in that as well. So if we right click on this and enable the rule, you'll see the two little check marks appear. Now we have to make sure that we do this for both outgoing and incoming. All right. Make sure that we enable the rules. Okay, and we do this on all of our systems. Here, another way to get to the firewall is by actually just typing fire. Okay, and we can go into the actual firewall. Again, take a look, make sure that we're enabling the correct rules, both incoming and outgoing. All right, so that is all done for the two clients. And now we just have to make sure that we set up for the router. Okay. The name of the actual rules, I will tell you, it's basically the file sharing, and it's ICMP and version 4. Okay, so now if we go into our server, okay, sorry, we go into our server and we type in fire, okay, and we go into our firewall, there's going to be a little bit of difference here, okay? When we go into our inbound rules, okay, and we look for file sharing, we will find it, okay, right here, file and printer sharing, echo request, ICMP version 4 in, but we can see that there isn't a second one, okay? With the servers, there's only one rule, okay, for the actual computer. So we only need to enable one rule here on the server, okay? We do have to enable it both on incoming and outgoing, but it's only one rule, okay? And then we have to do the exact same thing on DC. Okay, so now we've established all the rules. So if we go back into client 2 and we take a look at our actual setup, we can see now that when we ping, we will actually get the ping back. All right. So now we can test our other setup. We have 2, which is the server, which works as well. So this way we can basically ping back and forth between our systems. If we go over to client 1 and basically we do a setup for the ping as well here, okay, and we ping the actual, we ping our actual gateway, we'll find that this should also function correctly. However, because we don't have a router right now, there is no possible way of actually pinging the other side of this network. In other words, the other actual NIC card on the router. To do this, we have to set up this as a router. So how do we set this up as a router? Well, to set this up as a router, we have to install a role. So if we go back into our dashboard and add the roles and features, if we go in, it's going to be role-based. It's going to be on this particular server. And we look for, in this role menu, all the way at the bottom here, where it says remote access, we click on that, and this is what we are choosing for the networking. We can continue through going next, until we get to role services. Here it's asking us whether we want to set up direct access VPN, routing, and web application proxy. The only thing that we want to set up is routing. However, when we click on routing, we will have VPN and direct access installed as well. This is needed for the routing, okay? So we'll just let that go, say next, and continue on. Don't touch anything here, say next, and install. So now this will install our routing. And once this is installed, we will have to do a minor setup in order to start the actual server routing. So let's give this a couple of seconds. If you need to step away right now, I will resume as soon as this is done, so probably in about 3 minutes or so. So I will give everybody 3 minutes in order to get a drink of water or anything like that. Hi, Taylor. Actually, the attendance is being attended by the program that you're on right now. So as long as you're here and you're doing the actual session, your attendance is being recorded by Blackboard. So we're not using Add Class right now. Are there any other questions right now while while we're waiting a couple of minutes? Yes, there's only going to be one attempt. It's basically the same as any other quiz. All right. So basically, you're going to get one attempt. The questions are going to be between 5 and 10 questions, and you are not going to be able to backtrack. If you get 5 questions, you'll get about 6 minutes. If you get 10 questions, you'll get around 11 minutes. No, the recording for this will not be posted right after this particular session. The recording, the actual video, is going to be posted to YouTube, and I will send you a link, but it will not be posted till Thursday evening. I want to make sure that everybody has come to this particular lab session so that I can explain everything to everyone before I start posting videos. So this session will be posted on Thursday, and the same thing will happen next week as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back into it. Okay, so now we have actually set up our remote access role, and it is completed installing. So we're going to close this. And now we have to make sure that we actually have this activated. Now, if we click on this, which is Open and Getting Started Wizard, we'll find that it basically only gives us options for VPN and direct access. Okay, this is not something that we want on the actual wizard. Okay, we don't want to deploy direct access or VPN. We don't have any basically direct access or VPN. So we're going to close this, and we're going to go into Tools, and we're actually going to go into Routing and Remote Access. Here we'll be given a tool which we can go into, and we can actually manipulate the actual server and the router locally. So if we right click on this and go into Configure and Enable Routing and Remote Access, okay, it will give us a wizard. When we click Next, we will receive a screen that talks about VPN, about NAT, VPN and NAT, and the 2 private networks, which is basically a point-to-point connection for VPN. The one that we're interested in is custom configuration. So if we click on this and click Next, we will get another list setting up all the different information that we can set up here, all the different services, I should say. And here at the bottom is what we are interested in, LAN routing. If we click on LAN routing and click Next, it will ask us, it will give us a summary and say, are you done? We say, yes, we are done. This will now ask us if we want to start the service. We say yes, because we do want to start this service, because we want this to become a router. Okay? We have to wait a couple of minutes while the actual service is set up to run. And you can see that after it's done, we have a little green arrow on our actual router or our server. If we click on the down arrow, we can see that we now have other information set up here. Okay? So this information here is now, now we know that the actual router is functioning. Okay? It is showing us what our networks are, and it's showing us what our incoming and outgoing bytes are. We have some other information here as well that we can take a look at as we go through this. Now, this means now that our router is functioning, okay? Which means that if I go into client 1, okay, and I ping my actual default gateway, I should get pings through, okay? This router is running. How many of you think that right now at this point I should be able to ping the other network? Okay, how many people think that you can actually ping the other network? Okay, so far the people that have answered think that you can ping the other network. Well, unfortunately, if I try to ping the other network, okay, I will not get through. Because we have forgotten one thing, okay? And this is one of the things that a lot of students get sucked up into, and they don't understand why something isn't working. You have to remember that when we're setting up all the information, we did not set up, yes, exactly, Gurpreet. There is no default gateway. We did not set this up. So we have to make sure that we set it up so that this little catch doesn't catch us, okay? So if we go into our network, go into properties and go into IC, the TCP/IP, okay? And here in default gateway, 192.168.100.1, and now we say OK and close. And then we set up exactly the same thing here, except, of course, we're going to be using a different default gateway because we're using on the 200 side. All right. We go in here and do 192.168.200.1. And we say OK. And we also have to remember to set up DC1, okay? The router doesn't need to be set up this way because the router is a router. That's what the server is being used as right now, and it does not need any default gateways because it's actually transferring information to each side. The DC1, on the other hand, does need a default gateway because it is going to be sending information back to client 1, which means that in this particular case, it will not send back any information if it does not have this default gateway. No, you're right. DHCP is not set up as of yet. So Andre, you would not be able to give out this gateway as of yet because DHCP has not been set up. Right now, we are just testing the actual connectivity of the network. In other words, we want to make sure everything is running before we set up anything, whether it be DHCP, DNS, Active Directory, or anything. We want to make sure that this particular network is fully functional. Okay? All right, so we'll go in here. We'll set up our default gateway. And now say OK and close. So now all the default gateways are set up. At least I believe they should be, unless I lost track of something. And now if we do a ping, we will see that we can get to the actual other side of this particular system. If we ping number 2, which is the server, we can also get through. However, if we ping the client on the other side, it's not going to get through. This sometimes makes students tear their hair out because they seem to think that they've done something wrong. Yes, it is something that you did wrong, but it's something that is a little bit sneaky. Remember when I told you, when we were looking at the clients, that the clients have 2 rules in the actual firewall set up for the ICMP version 4. What we need to do is go back into this firewall and take a closer look at the actual rules. If we take a closer look at the actual rules, okay, we will see that under the profile, one of them is domain and the other one is private and public. This private public one, if we scroll along, will show that here the remote address that this actual ping can come from can only come from a local subnet, which means that in order to be able to ping this, it would have to be on the exact same subnet. We don't want this. We want to be able to ping across the router. So we have to change this so that it's not local. So we double click on this and we open up the rule and we go to scope. In scope, we click on scope and we say remote IP address. Here we click on any IP address, not just a local subnet. Then we apply and say OK. Remember that we have to do this for both rules. So we come down here and double check our rules for this one here. Double check that we're on private and public. And double check that it's a local subnet. Double click on it. Go into scope. Say IP address. Say apply. Say OK. So now this particular client is done. Now we'll go in here and we'll go into the firewalls and do the exact same thing. We go into the private public, double click on it, go into scope, change this, say apply, say OK, change it for the inbound rules as well, double check it, make sure it's on private public, say scope, any IP, apply, OK. Go back to our first client, go into our command line, and now take a look, and sure enough, our ping works correctly. All right, so now we have our entire network set up correctly. So everything is now functional, okay? We can ping from one system to another. So we can ping to our routers, we can ping to our DC, we can ping to our clients. Everything is pinging. So now we have our set up and everything is set up correctly, including our host names, okay, which we set up earlier. So now the next step would be to set up our DHCP, because we want to make sure that the DHCP is fully established, okay? Now, there's two ways that we can go about this. We can actually install Active Directory and DNS, and then afterwards install DHCP, which would be one way of doing it, because the DHCP needs to be authorized and so forth on the Active Directory later anyways. But I want to make sure that everything is functioning in the network before I even set up Active Directory or anything else. So I'm going to install DHCP first. So if I take a look at my project, I know that DHCP has to be set up on server 2, okay? So therefore, I'm going to be setting it up on DC1. So if I go back in and I go into my DC1, okay, I'm going to set it up on this particular one at the role. I'm going to install it, okay? So if I go under Manage and I go into Add Roles and Features, all right, and then go through this, you'll see that my DHCP server is here within the server roles. So if I click on that, it's going to add a couple of features for me. And if I click Next, and Next, and finally, I can install. All right, so we're going to set up the install and let it continue through. Okay, so while we're waiting for this to install, two of the things that we have to take care of is the clients. Currently, the clients are set up with static IP addresses. We don't want this, okay? So we want to go in here and we want to take off the static IP addresses because we're going to be using DHCP for this. That's very simple. We just say obtain it automatically from the actual server that we're going to be using. Okay, so that one is done, and then we go into client 2, we go into our actual network connections, properties, and set up this on TCP/IP, and just say obtain automatically as well. Say OK and close. So now these two will be trying to get the IPs automatically. If we go back into DC1 here, you can see that the installation has succeeded and it is completed. And I'm going to close this. Okay. And now we're going to go take a look at this. We're going to click on DHCP and we're just going to say commit and close. And now we have to go into our DHCP using the tools menu. And in the DHCP, you will see that both the IP version 4 and IP version 6 is actually green, okay? The reason for this, like I said, we are not on an Active Directory server. So therefore, this does not need to be authorized. Normally, if you click on the server, you'll have an authorize up here, okay? In this particular case, we do not have an authorize because it is not, as of yet, part of an Active Directory. So this will just run the way it is. The other thing is that we have the IP version 4, and we need to make sure that we add scopes to this for both sides of the network. Okay? So what we do is if we create a new scope here and open up our wizard, the very first thing is we're going to give it a name. So 192.168.100.0. So this is going to be the 100 network. The description, we're going to say network 01. And remember, these are only names and descriptions. They don't mean anything except for you to understand what you've done, okay? Next, this is where we actually set up our addresses. So here we do 192.168.100.10. We're going to begin at 10 because that gives us a few addresses at the bottom of the actual pool of addresses that we have that we can use for servers, printers, and things like that. All right. We're going to end it at the very top of the actual address pool. So it's going to be 192.168.100.254. Remember, you must leave two addresses, the network address and the broadcast address. You don't put them in with the hosts. Okay? So now we say next on this. And here, if we did not leave the IP addresses from the actual pool that we were creating, we could put our exclusions here. Okay? So we could exclude, if we started from 1, we could exclude from 1 to 10 here. Or if there's something in the middle of this particular IP address range that we want to exclude, we can also do it here. In this particular case, we don't need this, so we're going to just go past it. We're going to leave the lease duration at 8 days for the default, and we're going to say no. We'll configure these options later and say next. This will allow us to finish. And as you can see, we have our scope, but the scope is still red. Okay? So now we're going to create another scope for our second actual network. So it's going to be 192.168.200.0, and we'll call this network 2. All right, so this is our names for this. We set up the addresses exactly the same way, 192.168.200.10, and then we ended exactly the same place at 254. All right, no exclusions, we're okay. 8 days, good, no, and say next and finish. All right, so now we have our two scopes. The scopes are set up. The only thing now is we have to make sure that we set up our scope options, okay? These are what are given out as extra information beyond the IP address. So for instance, they are things like your default gateway, your DNS server, your DNS server name, your domain name or DNS name, your WINS, okay, and your WINS nodes. So what we actually do here is if we go into scope options, we can create and configure our scope options. In the scope options, what we're going to do is we're going to configure the router or the default gateway. So in this particular case, this top one is the 200, so we're going to do 192.168.200.1, okay? That's our default gateway for the 200. Please make sure that you click on Add. If you click Apply, this will disappear, okay? You have to click on Add so that it is propagated into this little box, and then you can click Apply, and it will go here, all right? Do the same for the scope options here, except, of course, we're going to set it up for the actual default gateway on the 100 side. And we say Add. So now we have this one set up, and we say Apply. Okay? Now, you might be asking yourself, why didn't I set up the DNS and the WINS and everything here? The reason being is because our DNS server, number one, is not set up yet. But that doesn't mean we can't set it up here in our DHCP. But the actual server is going to be the address 192.168.200.2, which means that both of these scopes are going to be using the exact same address. So instead of duplicating it in both scopes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to server options, and I'm going to set them up in server options. So if I configure the server options, you'll see that I have the same options available, okay? And instead, I can go down to DNS servers here and click on this. And then I can tell it I want it to go to 192.168.200.2, and I can add this. It's going to try to validate this, but it is not going to find it. That's okay. I'm going to say, yes, I still want it, and continue on with this. The next thing I want to do is I want to set up the actual DNS domain name. Okay? The domain name, of course, is going to be leo.com. Okay? And we're going to be okay with this one in particular. Okay? So that's set up now. Now we go down and we look for the WINS, okay, server. So here we find at 44 the WINS server. So we want to set up the address for the WINS server. Again, it's the same address as our DNS because that is where we are going to install our WINS server. And we click on add, and that is in. Now, the final thing that we have to set up is 046, which is the WINS node type. The node type is going to be 0x08. Now, this is a legacy service that was used in Windows prior to DNS. In other words, it is a name resolution that is used by Windows. The way WINS works is basically it is a flat type of database. In other words, all the names are on the same level. And it doesn't matter where you are, there is no hierarchy like there is in DNS. Okay? In other words, the computer name is the computer name. It's one name. Okay? It doesn't have .com attached to it or anything like that. So the way that WINS worked is it had a few different node types. And if you look over here, you will see that you have the node types listed. Okay? The node types, there's a B node, a P node, an M node, and an H node. The B node was basically a node where when the name resolution or the name, looking up the name, the actual computer would send out a broadcast. Okay? You can see that there's already a problem with this because broadcasts don't go beyond routers. So therefore, whatever service was doing the name resolution would have to be on the same subnet. Okay? The second node, P node, is actually a point-to-point node. This point-to-point node allows to go directly to the server that is doing the name resolution. The M node was what was called the mixed node. Now, the mixed node used broadcast first, and if the broadcast failed, then it would use the P node. This is okay, but not great, because of the fact that in this particular instance, you have the broadcast going out, which ends up using up a lot of bandwidth. If you had multiple people sending out to try and find out names, resolution, that means your network would be flooded with a bunch of broadcasts looking for these names. So it's better to actually do the P node first. That is what the H node is. That's called the hybrid node, and it actually does P node first, and if that fails, then it does the broadcast. Okay? So that's basically a little bit of information about why you're choosing 0x08 in the first place. Okay? Now that we have all of this set up, we apply this, and you can see that all the settings that we've put are here in the server options. Now, if we go back to our scopes and we go into the actual scope options, you will see that these have been propagated to the scope options as well. So in other words, the router we've set up with our default gateway in the actual scope, but the rest of the options are being taken from the server options. And this way, both of our scopes have the exact same options set up for 006, 015, 044, 046. All right? So this sets up all of our systems now. So now that we have this set up, we need to make sure that we actually activate our scopes. So we'll activate both scopes by right-clicking on it and activating from the actual menu. Once these are activated, okay, they can now be used. So now if I go into client 2 and I go into our system here, we've already cleared out our static IP. If I do ipconfig here, okay, we can see that right now we have an APIPA address, okay, the 169. So I want to use ipconfig/renew in order to be able to jump on to the actual server. As you can see right now, it sets up our IP address exactly the way we wanted it. Here's our suffix, okay, the connection specific, and we have our IP address, which is 10, and it's chosen from the pool. Our gateway is also 200, okay? If we do ipconfig all, which will give us far more information, we can see that we also have our Windows server, or Win server, okay, set up. We have our DNS server set up. We have our DHCP server set up, and our default gateway. So everything is exactly how we wanted it. Now, there is one other thing. If we go to client 1 and we take a look at our actual IP config here, we see that we also have an APIPA address. However, if we do an IP config and we do a renew on this side, and we wait for a second as it tries to take a look around, we'll find that this fails, okay? And will not get any type of address from the DHCP. Yes, correct. That is the question I was going to ask. What is it that you need on this side of the network in order for it to be able to give you the DHCP? The answer being a DHCP relay agent. Okay? So now, what we have to set up is this relay agent. So if we take a look at our original project, we know that our DHCP server is on server 2. That means that the DHCP on this side works fine. There is nothing that we need to do on this side. However, on this side, it does not work. Now, remember how DHCP works. When the Discover goes out, it goes out as a broadcast. That means that this host is going to broadcast the DHCP request, or sorry, the Discover, and it will go to this router and stop. There is no way for this to get through here, okay? Which means that to be able to get to this particular server, we have to set up a relay agent on this side. What does the relay agent do? The relay agent takes that broadcast, turns it into a unicast, and sends it directly to the actual DHCP server. This DHCP server then sends back to the relay agent, which then sends it back to the actual host. Okay, so we have to make sure that we set it up on this particular network. We know that this network is network 1, and if you recall, we named our actual interface the correct name, network 1, when we set it up. So what we have to do here is we have to set up an actual protocol, the basically routing protocol, a new routing protocol. So we go to a new routing protocol, we choose DHCP relay agent and say OK, which adds the DHCP relay agent right here. There are two things that you have to do with this relay agent. One is we have to tell it which interface it's supposed to be attached to. And two, we have to tell it where to send the actual requests. Okay? So how do we do this? Well, if we right-click on this, you can see at the very top it says New Interface. We click on New Interface and we choose the network interface that we need to use. In this particular case, it's very easy because we renamed it. So I choose Network 01 and say OK. Then I'm going to leave all this information the same and say OK. We now have this functioning. Okay? Now, what I have to do is if I right-click again and go to Properties, it will ask me what address I want to send it to. So in this particular case, it's going to be 192.168.200.2. And I add, and then I say Apply and OK. So now this particular system is functioning. If I go to my client 1 and I take a look at it now, we'll do just an IP config first to show you that the PIPA is still here. Okay, but now what we'll do is we'll hit renew, and hopefully, barring any problems with the system, it should give us an IP address from our pool on the 200 side, or sorry, the 100 side. And as you can see, it has given us this actual address. So now we have 192.168.100.10. We have our default gateway and everything else. So now if we take a look at the IP config and we do an IP config all to make sure that all the information is there, you can see that all the information is there. Everything is hunky-dory. So if I now do, let me just go through this, do a ping, you can see that I can now ping the other side and my other client. So now I know for a fact that my entire network, before I installed Active Directory or DNS or anything, is fully functional. I know that it is working. I know that everything is working. I know that I have full connectivity. Okay? So guys, this is basically the end of today's session. Okay? And this is basically how you would start off your project. Okay? I know that projects are very hard, but when you take a look at them, you have to break them down logically. Okay? It does not matter what exactly you're doing, whether you're actually, let's say, doing CCNA and entering commands on a router, or you are setting up a computer and putting cards in it, or whether you are doing a program, it does not matter. Okay? You must always plan it out, and you must always approach it in a logical manner. There's some place to start and some place to end. If you are troubleshooting, you need to make sure that you take a look at what the problem may be from the very bottom to the very top. Okay? Which means the first thing you do is look at the cables. Make sure that the cables are not unplugged. Make sure that everything is on and everything is functioning. And then you continue to the next step and the next step and the next step. If you use a logical process like this, I pretty much guarantee that you should be able to get through anything without a lot of problems. Okay? So hopefully you guys have all learned something. Like I said, I'm going to set this video up on Thursday and post it so that you guys can look at it before you take the test. Okay? And hopefully, please make sure that you are all safe. Please practice social distancing and please stay healthy. Okay? We're always worried about everybody there. Okay? So please make sure that you guys are okay. Please make sure that you guys come to the actual online classes. I believe that there was an email message sent out or a post saying that you guys can actually pick up laptops and stuff at the school. If you don't have something at home, I suggest that you do actually pick one up, okay, and tell anybody that might need one. And also, please make sure that you try this project out. Watching somebody do a project and saying, oh, now I get it, believe me, you are not 100% aware. Until you actually try the project on your own without actually watching the video and get through it successfully, that's when you know you've gotten at least a grasp of it. Okay? I realize that, and I do realize that it's hard on some laptops. I'm not saying do it right this minute. I'm just saying that in the future, when you get a chance, try it, okay? Try to go through the whole project or create a project for yourself and do it. The only way that you can learn this stuff is through practice, okay? Theory is great, but if you do not have practice, you will try to sit down at a computer and you will not be able to do it, okay? There are very few people who can read a book and do something without practicing it at all. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's basically it for today. Like I said, I hope everybody learned something. I hope that this helped you out and gave you an idea of exactly how to actually go about at least a portion of this project. Next week, we'll be talking about the Active Directory and the DNS and WINS. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about the VPN. Okay? I'm going to set up the sessions for you to make sure that, actually, I believe all the sessions are actually set up, so you shouldn't have a problem with getting onto the actual Blackboard. And like I said, the quiz is going to be published on Friday. You're going to have 3 days in which to attempt it. You'll have one attempt, and it will be 10 questions. Good luck, okay? If you do have any questions, I have set up a forum, a question forum on Blackboard. Please use the question forum, okay, in order to ask questions, because this way, if somebody else has the same question, at least it will be answered. Also, with the emails, please don't email me unless you have like a private matter that you want to talk about and you don't want anybody else to see it, okay? Unfortunately, the last little while, the amount of emails that have flown into the email box are quite extensive, all right? So also, please give me a little bit of a chance when for answering the questions, because I do have other things that I have to do. I will try to make sure that I get back and answer your questions within at least 48 hours of you posting the question, okay? Or sooner, okay? I'm always looking at stuff, and I want to make sure that you guys get the best of whatever you need information-wise, okay? All right, guys. Thanks very much. Take it easy. Stay safe.